Now before we get started, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Remember, you will not get any notifications about new videos coming unless you also click that bell and select all. Alright, to jump into it, what I want to go over today is basically goodness. What is good? What makes a thing good? And what makes an action good or moral? Now we're going to be going through this fairly quickly, but I am going to need to define some terms. You might want to pause, write them down, mull it over a little bit, make sure you've got it before moving on. So the first thing we want to talk about is goodness. Goodness is basically what we say of a thing when it fulfills its purpose, or is a really good example of its essence, what it's supposed to be, what it is. And we know what things are by their purpose, don't we? We can look at a thing and kind of figure out what it's for, what is it ordered to in philosophical language. So for example, if I have a pair of these, I can kind of tell by looking at them that these are for cutting. That seems to be what they're good at. That seems to be what they're for. And because I know that cutting is what these are for, then I know that they are good scissors if they are sharp. A dull pair of scissors is not a good pair of scissors because scissors are ordered toward cutting. That's their essence, if you will. That's what they are. That's what they're for. Now compare that to a shoe. If I have a shoe, I can see that this thing is ordered toward protecting my foot. So I would not want one of these to be sharp. So even though I can call both of these objects good, what I mean by good is different in each case because what these are for and what these are for is different. They are ordered toward different ends. That's the way we say it philosophically. Basically, they have different goals. They have different purposes. And we call them good if they can attain those purposes well based on certain features like comfort or sharpness. So that's what makes a thing good. So that's what makes a thing good in general. What about people? Well, when we talk about human beings, we can see that we are different than other things because of our abilities. We have certain abilities that other things don't have. Well, in order to know what makes a good human being, we need to know what a human being is. What sets it apart from other things? Just as we can tell that scissors and shoes have different purposes based on what they are and what they do best, we can look at human beings. One thing that makes human beings different from other created things is that we are alive. I mean, that's one of the most basic differences between us and rocks and dirt, right? We actually have the principle of life within us. We grow, we take in nutrition, we can multiply ourselves. But of course, plants and animals can do that too. Well, the difference between us and plants is that we can move around, right? We have self-mobility. Of course, animals can do that too. So what makes human beings different from the common beast or common animal? Well, it's our rationality. Human beings are rational animals, according to Aristotle. So while we do share many of the same features as a common beast, what makes us different is that we are rational. Our life principle includes within it the ability to know truths, to know reality, and also to tell the difference between good and bad. Theologians refer to these abilities as powers of the soul. Because we have rational souls, we have an intellect or a mind. That's what knows reality, recognizes truth, and we have free will. And that is the part of our soul that kind of hungers for goodness. And it is what gives us our freedom to act. We don't just act on instinct like animals or irrational beasts do. So what a human being is an embodied, rational soul. This body is not just my soul's earth suit. It's not just kind of the machine that my soul rides around in for a period of time. No, this is me. My body is actually me. So besides the physical, the material, there's the spiritual or the immaterial. That is the soul, the thing that makes this body alive. The thing that makes it a human being is that it is embodied by a rational soul. So what does all that mean for goodness? Well, what it means is that if to be a human being is to be an embodied rational soul, then the good or the purpose for a human being is to be embodied, to know truth, and to choose goodness. It is those things that set us apart from all the rest of creation. And so it is those things to which we are ordered. And this philosophy goes together perfectly with Christian theology, because what did Jesus say eternal life is? He didn't say it's being up in the clouds, playing harps, and flying around with wings. No, he said this is eternal life, to know you, God. Well, what is God? Infinite truth, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and infinite goodness. So for a human being to be in the presence of God is heaven. Seeing God is heaven. That's why the theologians call this the beatific vision. It's the vision of beatitude. Everything our souls desire, all the truth, all the goodness is found in God alone. And so that is what we are seeking as human beings. Ultimately, we are ordered for the beatific vision. Now, coupled with the Beatitudes is not just the desire for goodness or the desire for truth, but its pursuit. And the way we pursue truth and goodness is through our actions. We are not like the Gnostics who don't think that what we do in the body matters. Rather, it matters supremely. And so when we consider what kind of actions we are going to choose, we need to be able to think through them morally. And taking a moral action basically just means choosing good actions. So what makes an action good? Typically here we want to look at three different factors. The first factor is often referred to as the object. What is the thing you're thinking about doing? Sometimes the object is always good, like loving someone. Sometimes the object is always bad, like raping someone. And sometimes the object can be good or bad depending on other things. And that is why the object is really only the first part of the formula. The second part of the formula is called intent. And the intent is, like it sounds, simply the reason one has for doing a certain action. Now, intent is important because we can do good things for good reasons. We can do good things for bad reasons. We can also do bad things for good reasons and bad things for bad reasons. For example, let's say that I see a young person helping an old lady cross the street. Okay, typical example of moral goodness, right? Now, if that person is helping the old woman cross the street simply out of love for humanity and a willingness to be charitable, then that is a good thing. But what if you discovered that the reason that person was helping the old lady cross the street was to gain her trust so that later he could rob her? Well, now we've got a problem. He's still doing a good thing, but he's doing it for such a bad reason that we can't call it a moral action anymore. So we always have to look at intent as well as the actual object of the action. The third part of this moral equation is the circumstance, or kind of the context in which everything takes place. These become important because in different situations, the morality of a certain act may change. The morality of an action is not determined simply by the object or the intent, but also given the total conditions that they take place in. And it is these three features that determine whether an action is good or bad. And here's the thing, for the equation to work, it's got to pass all three. If there is badness in any one of the steps, it kind of infects the entire operation. So if I go to do something that is inherently evil, that is a per se evil or a bad thing, it doesn't matter what my intent is or what the conditions are. There's no way that intent or the conditions can, say, justify a rape. If it passes the object test and the thing I want to do is either morally neutral or morally good, then we also want to look at my intent. Do I have a good intent? Am I trying to do something good? Is my purpose beneficial? If it is, then it passes the second test. If it's not, we're back to it being an immoral act, even if the thing I'm doing isn't inherently or per se bad or evil. The total action can still be considered immoral if I'm doing it for an immoral reason. And then finally, the circumstances. If I've got a good object of my action, I have a good intent for my action, but the circumstances don't really work out in a good way, it could still be an immoral action. Let's go back to helping the old lady cross the street. It's a good thing as such. Perhaps my intent is good. I'm just doing it out of love for people. But let's say that this person doesn't want my help, and they say, oh, no, thank you. And I say, oh, no, I'm doing this. Well, see, now we're in a different kind of situation. The circumstances have changed. For someone to impose their will on somebody else in a situation like that is not morally beneficial. Now, how does all of this apply to specific situations? Well, what we can consider is that when it comes to the big moral hot-button issues of today, interestingly, nearly all of them surround the issue of life. Medical ethics and marital ethics cover a huge spectrum of the ethical debate going on today. With medical ethics, it often has to do with ending life. With marital ethics, it's usually about the beginning of life. Now, what we need to remember is that for a human being, life is a per se good. part of what it is to be a human being is to be alive. Now, what does it mean to be alive? It means your soul is embodied. Death is always a separation, and the death of a human person is the separation of the body and the soul. Now, once the soul, the rational soul, is separated from the body is no longer a person. It's just the material left over from this division. In fact, in Catholic theology, there is no human person there anymore, because a human person is an embodied soul. So when the embodied soul is no longer embodied, it's something else. This is why we pray for the holy souls in purgatory and not the holy people. So long as the rational soul and the material body are taken apart, that is a bad thing for a human person. Therefore, death is bad. Death is evil. And what that means is that murder is evil. Now, murder is to intentionally bring about the death of an innocent human being. And you've got to have that entire recipe together for something to be murder. Causing a death accidentally is not murder because there's no intent. The killing of someone who is not innocent in a capital way is not murder. And killing something that isn't a human being is not murder. Now, that's not to say that any of these things are good, they're just not murder. So, accidents, self-defense, killing in a just war, authorized use of the death penalty, killing non-humans, none of these things count as murder. So when it comes to medical ethics, what are the two big hot topic discussions? Abortion and euthanasia. Abortion is the intentional bringing about the death of an innocent human person. Abortion has been denounced by the church from the very beginning. It didn't take us until the 1970s to figure out that abortion was wrong. And if you think through even the hard cases in the abortion scenario, it becomes obvious pretty quickly why it's wrong. All you have to do is substitute 15-year-old, 20-year-old, 45-year-old into the abortion equation to see that murder is always wrong. It's only when we buy into the lie that the preborn aren't really quite as human as these other age groups that it seems to have any validity whatsoever. The only difference between a preborn human person and a post-born human person is size, location, and specific needs. None of those things define a human person, though, and so none of them make that thing a non-human. Therefore, intentionally bringing about its death is murder. And what about euthanasia? Same thing. We are still intentionally bringing about the death of an innocent human person when we kill them to end their life due to poor life happiness. Killing to alleviate suffering is murder. That is something that is denounced by the church as a grave moral sin. However, that doesn't mean that we need to artificially prolong someone's natural death. We are under no moral obligation to make someone live as long as they possibly can. So there's two different issues there. That's not to say that there aren't some hard cases, but the general precepts of the church follow from the good moral philosophy that we've been talking about. So let's look at marital ethics. They also tend to have a lot to do with life, even though a lot of people haven't quite made that connection yet. So in order to know what the good for marriage is, we need to know what marriage's purpose is. Well, marriage is basically a sacramental protection over the sexual act. Now, the purposes of sex are pretty obvious. Basically, you have unification, that which brings two people together in a marital way, and procreation, the creation of life, fidelity and fecundity, if you will. Now, because the sexual act creates a human bond that should be unbreakable, and because it produces life that needs to be protected, a full range of activities are automatically judged as immoral because they don't fulfill those goods. So for example, fornication is sex outside of the marriage covenant. You're basically lying with your body. You're forming a bond that doesn't exist sacramentally, and you're making promises physically that you're not willing to keep spiritually. Of course, there are a whole range of actions that actually threaten the marriage covenant once it's made. Divorce, adultery, polygamy. There's a huge range of things that destroy the perfection of the marital sacrament. And then there are a range of sexual acts which are by nature disordered because they don't fulfill the purpose of sexual acts. It's not a disorder in the sense of having a disease. Rather, what the church is saying when it calls something a sexual disorder is that this is a sexual act that is not ordered to procreation and unification. And you need to have both. You know, a rape can create life, so it is procreative, but it's not unitive. In fact, it's the exact opposite. And even if the sexual act is fulfilling its purpose, if it's doing it outside of the protection of the marriage covenant, it basically becomes a big, dangerous lie. So there is obviously a lot more to moral theology than what we've gone over, but we have talked about a lot of stuff. What makes a thing good is that which promotes it into fulfilling its purpose. We know that purpose by what it does best, or what sets it apart from all other things. We saw that being a good human person is to be an embodied, rational soul, which means that we learn truth and we choose goodness over evil. And we saw that one of the ways in which we make good choices morally is by looking at the object of the act, what it is, whether or not it's a good or a bad act. We look at our intent, that has to be good as well, and then we consider the total circumstances. And if it is good all the way through, that is a good action, and that is something we should choose. And of course, all of this is really pointing toward the ultimate end, the ultimate goal, the ultimate good, and the ultimate truth. In this limited, finite world, we can choose between a lot of goods. I can have the good of cereal or the good of steak. I can have the good of marrying this person, the good of marrying that person. I can have the good of exercise or the good of sitting on the couch watching TV. We're free because even though our will always wants something that it sees as good, because we have a bunch of limited goods, we are able to choose between them. But the thing about limited goods is that they never ultimately satisfy. We can never get enough of anything that we like in order to be totally satisfied with its goodness or totally satisfied with the truths we have learned. Ultimately, our souls are only going to be completely satisfied when we have infinite truth to satisfy our intellect, infinite good to satisfy our will. And this is why God promises that the pure in heart, those whose wills are focused in on the good, will get the ultimate good forever. They will see God. All right, I hope this video has been helpful to you. If it has, would you mind giving it a like? And again, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You won't get any notifications about new videos dropping unless you also click that bell. Until next time, I'm Doug Beaumont. God bless you.